It wasn't announced with ceremony or softened by palace tradition. Instead, it came like a silent strike, swift, final, and deeply unsettling. After 25 years of unwavering service, a senior courtier was abruptly removed under Princess Anne's direct authority. No farewell, no public gratitude, just a cold administrative ending. And behind that decision, insiders suggest, lay tensions that had been quietly building for years. Before we go deeper into what this really means for the royal family, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss a single update. At first, it seemed almost impossible to believe. Figures like this do not simply disappear from the palace structure, not after decades of loyalty, not after years spent navigating the delicate machinery of royal life, where trust is currency and silence is survival. Yet the official statement, brief to the point of discomfort, offered nothing beyond confirmation. No explanation, no elaboration, just a carefully worded acknowledgement that a chapter had ended. And that silence, it didn't calm the situation, it intensified it. Because in a place where every word is weighed and every omission is deliberate, what isn't said often carries far more weight than what is. Within hours, whispers began to ripple through the palace corridors. Staff members, many of whom had worked alongside the courtier for years, were left stunned, quietly exchanging glances that said what they could not speak aloud. This wasn't retirement. It wasn't resignation. It was removal. Sudden, decisive, and executed with a level of finality that suggested something far more serious had taken place behind closed doors. The kind of decision that doesn't emerge overnight, but instead builds slowly, layer by layer, beneath the surface. And at the center of it all stood Princess Anne. Known for her unyielding work ethic and almost uncompromising sense of duty, she is not a figure who acts lightly. Every move she makes carries intention, precision, and a deep awareness of the institution she protects. So when reports began to suggest that this decision had been personally overseen by her, the tone of the entire situation shifted. This was no longer a quiet administrative reshuffle. This was something deliberate, something calculated, something that, perhaps, had been coming for far longer than anyone outside those inner circles realized. The timing only deepened the mystery. Why now? Why after 25 years of what had always been described as loyal, dependable service? Questions like these don't fade easily, they grow. Especially when those closest to the situation remain silent. And while no official explanation surfaced, early murmurs hinted at something more complicated. Internal disagreements, subtle clashes over protocol, a growing tension between tradition and a stricter, more disciplined interpretation of duty. Nothing confirmed, but enough to suggest that beneath the polished exterior of royal life, something had been shifting. And perhaps the most unsettling part of all was how quickly everything changed. One day, a trusted presence within the palace. The next, gone. No transition, no acknowledgement beyond the bare minimum. As if the system itself had quietly closed ranks, sealing off whatever truth lay beneath. But this wasn't just a routine personnel change, it was the culmination of tensions rooted deep within the palace system. For over 2 decades, this courtier wasn't just an employee, they were part of the palace's invisible backbone. Trusted with sensitive duties, present at pivotal moments, and woven into the daily rhythm of royal life, their role extended far beyond the public eye. There are roles within the monarchy that the public never sees. Positions that exist not for recognition but for stability, quiet forces that hold everything together while history unfolds in front of cameras. This courtier lived in that space. For 25 years, their presence was constant, almost immovable, like a fixture within the institution itself. They were there during moments of celebration and moments of strain, navigating shifting dynamics with a precision that only comes from experience. Not flashy, not outspoken, but deeply embedded in the system that keeps the monarchy functioning. Their responsibilities were not defined by a single title or a narrow list of duties. Instead, they moved through the inner workings of royal life with a level of access few ever achieve, coordinating delicate engagements, managing internal communications, and quietly ensuring that the machinery of protocol never faltered. They operated in a realm where discretion was everything. It was a role built on trust earned slowly, protected fiercely, and rarely questioned. And for years, that trust appeared unshakable. Those who worked alongside them often described a presence that was steady, composed, almost unbreakable under pressure. Loyalty wasn't something they performed, it was something they embodied. They understood the unspoken rules, the weight of tradition, the necessity of silence. In an environment where even the smallest misstep can ripple outward, they remained controlled, careful, and deeply aligned with the expectations of the crown. It is precisely why their sudden absence now feels so jarring. Because this wasn't someone on the margins. They were there for the major transitions, the kind that define eras. Royal weddings, state occasions, delicate moments of internal change. While others came and went, adapting to new roles or stepping into public visibility, this courtier remained behind the scenes, ensuring continuity. They belonged to what many quietly refer to as the old guard, those who were shaped by decades of tradition and who, in turn, helped preserve it. And with that longevity came something even more powerful: knowledge. Not the kind recorded in official documents, but the kind built over years of observation, experience, and proximity. They understood how decisions were really made, how tensions were managed, how crises were contained before they ever reached public awareness. That kind of insight is rare. And in a system as guarded as the monarchy, it is invaluable. Which is why their removal doesn't feel like the loss of just one individual. It feels like the disruption of something deeper, something structural. Because figures like this don't simply disappear without leaving a vacuum behind. Their absence creates questions. It exposes gaps. It forces others to step into roles they may not fully understand yet. And perhaps most importantly, it suggests that whatever led to this moment was significant enough to override decades of service, loyalty, and quiet dedication, which makes what happened next all the more extraordinary because such figures are rarely removed without cause. Long before the dismissal became official, there were signs subtle at first, then harder to ignore. Meetings that ran too long, decisions quietly overturned, and a growing sense that something within the palace hierarchy was shifting. At first, these moments were easy to dismiss. After all, the monarchy has always been a place of constant movement, where discussions stretch into late hours and decisions evolve behind layers of protocol. But this felt different. Those familiar with the inner workings began to notice a change in tone, a quiet tension threading its way through conversations that were once predictable, controlled, almost ritualistic. Something was no longer aligning. And in an institution built on precision, even the smallest misalignment can signal something much larger beneath the surface. Reports began to circulate, cautiously at first, suggesting disagreements over protocol. Not loud confrontations, not dramatic disputes, but something more controlled, more calculated. A difference in interpretation. A subtle push and pull between how things had always been done and how they were now expected to be handled. These were not the kinds of conflicts that erupt into open conflict. They linger. They build. And over time, they begin to reshape the environment in ways that are difficult to trace but impossible to ignore. And then there was the question of working style. Princess Anne, known for her relentless discipline and almost unyielding expectations, operates with a clarity that leaves little room for deviation. Efficiency is not a preference for her, it is a requirement. Duty is not flexible, it is absolute. So when whispers began to suggest that there were differences in approach between her and the courtier, it reframed everything. This was no longer just about routine disagreements. It hinted at a deeper incompatibility, a clash not of personalities, but of principles. At the same time, a quieter divide was beginning to take shape, one that extended beyond any single individual. A generational shift. On one side, those who had spent decades preserving tradition, relying on experience and established rhythms. On the other, a growing emphasis on refinement, discipline, and a more structured interpretation of royal responsibility. It wasn't a clean break. It was gradual, almost invisible at first. But as the months passed, that divide became harder to bridge. Insiders, speaking carefully and often in fragments, began to hint at what they described as friction behind closed doors. Not chaos, not disorder, but a persistent strain that never fully resolved. Meetings where conclusions felt unsettled. Decisions that seemed to circle back for reconsideration. A sense that influence was shifting, even if no one openly acknowledged it. And for someone who had once held a position of steady authority, that shift would not have gone unnoticed. There were also changes quiet, almost administrative, but significant. Responsibilities that had once been firmly within the courtier's domain began to shift elsewhere. Decisions that would have once passed through their oversight now appeared to be handled differently. Not removed entirely, not at first, but adjusted. Reduced. Gradually, subtly, their presence within the operational structure seemed to narrow, and in a place where influence is rarely declared but always felt, that kind of shift speaks volumes. At the same time, scrutiny within the palace appeared to intensify, processes reviewed, systems examined, standards reinforced with a sharper edge. It was as if the institution itself was tightening, becoming less tolerant of anything that didn't align perfectly with its expectations. And in that environment, even long-standing figures were not immune. Experience, loyalty, history, none of it guaranteed protection if something no longer fits. All of this unfolded quietly, almost imperceptibly to those outside the inner circle. But within it, the pressure was building. And by the time the dismissal became public, those who had been watching closely understood something important. This moment had not arrived suddenly. It had been forming for weeks, perhaps months, beneath the surface. And at the center of it all stood Princess Anne, known for her uncompromising approach to duty. Princess Anne has never been one to tolerate inefficiency or deviation from duty. Often described as the monarchy's most disciplined enforcer, her decisions are rarely impulsive and almost never reversed. For decades, her reputation has been built not on spectacle, but on consistency. While others captured headlines, she built something far more enduring: a record of relentless commitment, a schedule that rarely slowed, and a standard of discipline that left little room for error. Often referred to as the hardest-working royal, she has long operated with a clarity that can feel almost uncompromising. Duty, in her world, is not symbolic. It is functional. It must work. And when it doesn't, something or someone has to change. That philosophy has shaped the way she approaches every aspect of royal life. Unlike those who lead from a distance, she is known to engage directly, to question, to examine, to understand the mechanics behind the surface. A hands-on presence, not in the sense of control, but in the sense of accountability. Reports suggest that nothing escapes her attention for long, not inconsistencies, not delays, not even the subtle shifts that others might overlook. And when those patterns begin to form, she does not wait for them to resolve themselves. She acts. This is not new. Throughout her years of service, there have been moments quiet, often unpublicized, where she has stepped in to enforce standards that others hesitated to address. Protocol, for her, is not a suggestion. It is the framework that holds the institution together. When that framework begins to weaken, even slightly, it demands correction. Not later. Not eventually. Immediately. And always with precision. So when whispers began to suggest that she had initiated a review of internal operations, it did not come as a surprise to those who understand her approach. What did surprise them was the intensity of it. Because this was not a routine assessment. It felt deeper, more focused, as if something specific had triggered it. Something that required not just attention, but intervention. The kind of intervention that signals a loss of confidence. Within that context, the dismissal begins to take on a different meaning, not as an isolated decision, but as the outcome of a process that had already been set in motion. A process driven by standards that do not bend easily. And while no official explanation has been given, the narrative that has quietly formed around the decision frames it as necessary an act taken to preserve the integrity of the system itself. For some, this has been interpreted as a course correction, a recalibration of expectations within an institution that is constantly balancing tradition with the demands of the present. A reminder that no matter how long someone has served, the role must continue to meet the standard, not the standard of the past, but the standard of now. And in that sense, the decision becomes less about the individual and more about the structure they were part of. But that perspective is not universally shared. Others see it differently, as a harsh shift, a moment where experience and loyalty were outweighed by an uncompromising pursuit of efficiency. A decision that, while precise, carried a weight that extended far beyond its immediate impact. Because in a system built on continuity, removing a figure so deeply embedded is never simple. It sends a message, one that is felt not just by those directly involved, but by everyone within that structure. And that is where the true significance of this moment begins to unfold. Because decisions like this do not exist in isolation. They reshape expectations. They redefine boundaries. They alter the way the institution understands itself. And once that shift begins, it rarely stops at a single point, but the consequences of that decision would ripple far beyond a single office. The removal didn't just end a career, it sent a message. Within hours, corridors once filled with quiet routine were charged with uncertainty, as staff began to question what this meant for the future of the palace hierarchy. At first, the reaction was subdued, almost restrained, as if those within the system were waiting for clarity that never came. Conversations lowered into careful whispers. Familiar routines continued, but with a subtle tension beneath them, a quiet awareness that something fundamental had shifted. Because this wasn't just about one individual, it was about what their sudden absence represented. If someone so deeply embedded, so trusted, could be removed without warning, then what did that mean for everyone else? That question lingered, unspoken but impossible to ignore. Staff members who had once operated with confidence now found themselves reconsidering their place within the structure. Expectations, once understood through years of consistency, suddenly felt less certain. There was a growing sense that the rules had tightened, that the margin for error, if it had ever truly existed, was now gone entirely. And in an environment where precision is everything, that kind of shift doesn't just create caution, it creates unease. Concerns about job security began to surface quietly, not through open discussion, but through subtle changes in behavior, increased vigilance, greater attention to detail, a heightened awareness of how decisions were made and who was making them. It was as if the entire system had become more alert, more self-conscious, adjusting in real time to a new standard that had not been formally defined, but was clearly being enforced. And that uncertainty carried weight, because in a place built on tradition, predictability has always been a form of stability. Without it, even the most experienced figures can feel unsettled. Outside the palace walls, speculation began to grow. Media outlets, sensing the unusual nature of the situation, started to piece together fragments, building narratives in the absence of official explanation. The brevity of the palace statement only fueled that curiosity. Why so little detail? Why such restraint? In a world where even minor developments are often carefully framed, the lack of clarity here felt deliberate. And that deliberate silence became part of the story itself, an absence that demanded interpretation. Within insider circles, opinions quietly diverged. Some viewed the decision as long overdue, a necessary step to maintain standards in an institution that cannot afford inconsistency. From that perspective, it was not about loyalty or tenure, but about alignment. About ensuring that every part of the system continues to function exactly as it should. And if something no longer fits, no matter how established it may be, it must be addressed. But others saw it differently, as a break from tradition that felt abrupt, even unforgiving. A moment where decades of service seemed to carry less weight than the demands of the present. And that contrast between discipline and compassion, between efficiency and loyalty, created a deeper tension, one that extended far beyond the immediate situation. Because it raised a question that no one within the institution could easily answer. What does loyalty truly guarantee, if it can be overridden so completely? And it is in that question, quiet but persistent, that the true impact of this moment begins to reveal itself. Because the dismissal was not just an event, it was a signal. One that continues to ripple through every level of the palace, reshaping perceptions, redefining expectations, and forcing those within it to reconsider what stability really means. Yet beyond the immediate disruption, a larger question began to take shape. Was this simply an isolated decision, or the beginning of something far more significant? For many watching closely, it felt like a turning point, one that revealed how authority within the monarchy is evolving. Because when moments like this occur, they rarely exist in isolation. They are signals. Indicators of deeper shifts that are not always announced, but gradually felt. And in this case, the focus inevitably returns to Princess Anne, not just as the figure who made the decision, but as someone whose influence appears to be expanding in ways that are both subtle and profound. For years, her role has been defined by consistency and discipline, but now it seems to carry something more. A growing authority within the internal structure of the palace itself. This evolution is not loud. It doesn't arrive with declarations or formal announcements. Instead, it reveals itself through decisions like this: decisive, controlled, and impossible to ignore. And as those decisions accumulate, they begin to reshape the balance of power. Not dramatically, not overnight, but steadily, quietly, in a way that only becomes visible when something significant disrupts the expected order. At the same time, there is a sense that the institution itself may be moving slowly but deliberately away from certain long-standing internal traditions, not abandoning them entirely, but refining them, adjusting them to meet the demands of a modern monarchy that must operate under increasing scrutiny. And in that process, figures who were once untouchable due to their experience or longevity may now find themselves subject to a different standard, a sharper one, less forgiving. This creates a tension that is difficult to resolve, because the monarchy has always relied on a delicate balance between preservation and adaptation. Tradition gives it identity, continuity gives it strength, but relevance requires change. And when those forces begin to pull in different directions, decisions like this become more than administrative, they become symbolic. They represent a choice, a direction. For long-serving staff members, the implications are impossible to ignore. If decades of service no longer guarantee security, then the entire understanding of loyalty within the institution begins to shift. It becomes less about time served and more about alignment, about meeting expectations that may themselves be evolving. And that creates a new kind of pressure, one that is less visible, but far more persistent. At the highest levels, there are also signs of a subtle rebalancing among senior royals. Authority within the monarchy has never been entirely static, but moments like this suggest that certain voices are becoming more central in shaping how the institution operates. Not through public declarations, but through internal decisions that carry lasting consequences. And as those decisions accumulate, they begin to redefine where influence truly lies. Outside the palace, public perception adds another layer to this evolving narrative. In an era where accountability is increasingly expected, actions like this can be interpreted in multiple ways. For some, it signals strength, a willingness to uphold standards regardless of history or sentiment. For others, it raises questions about how tradition and loyalty are valued within an institution built upon both. And that dual perception only deepens the complexity of the moment. Because ultimately, this is not just about one dismissal. It is about what that dismissal represents. A shift in tone, a recalibration of expectations, a quiet but undeniable indication that the monarchy is adapting, even if it does so on its own terms. And as those adaptations continue, they will shape not just how the institution functions internally, but how it is understood by the world beyond its walls. And as the dust begins to settle, the deeper meaning of this moment is only just coming into focus. 25 years of service reduced to a single line in a palace statement. It raises a difficult question. In an institution built on tradition, how much weight does loyalty truly carry when change becomes unavoidable? For those who have dedicated their lives to the monarchy, loyalty has always been more than a virtue, it has been a quiet contract. Not written, not spoken aloud, but deeply understood. You serve with discretion, with consistency, with an almost invisible devotion, and in return, there is a sense of permanence. A belief that your place, once earned, will be protected by the very system you uphold. But moments like this challenge that belief. They force a reconsideration of what loyalty truly guarantees when the institution itself begins to shift beneath your feet. Because loyalty, while deeply valued, does not exist in isolation. It exists within a structure that must continue to evolve, and that evolution does not always move gently. Sometimes it demands difficult choices that place the future above the past, the needs of the institution above the contributions of the individual. It is in these moments that the tension becomes most visible. Tradition asks for continuity. Modernization demands adaptation. And somewhere between those two forces, decisions are made that reshape the very fabric of the system. This dismissal carries that weight, not just as an administrative action, but as an emotional rupture. 25 years is not just time, it is experience, relationships, memory. It is a lifetime spent understanding the unspoken rhythms of an institution that rarely reveals its inner workings. To see that reduced to a brief acknowledgement feels, to many, like a quiet erasure, not of what was done, but of what it meant. And that feeling lingers, even as the institution moves forward. Yet the monarchy has always been defined by its ability to endure, to adapt under pressure, even when that adaptation comes at a cost. History is filled with moments where change was necessary, where difficult decisions were made to preserve something larger than any one individual. But knowing that does not make those decisions easier to accept. It simply places them within a broader narrative, one where the survival of the institution often requires sacrifices that are rarely acknowledged in full. For those within the system, the implications are deeply personal. This is not just a story they observe, it is one they feel. It reshapes how they understand their roles, their futures, their place within a structure that now feels less certain than it once did. The culture shifts, subtly but unmistakably. Expectations become sharper. The margin for error narrows, and loyalty, while still essential, is no longer the only measure of value. Outside the palace, the story resonates differently. It becomes a reflection of a larger reality that even the most established institutions are not immune to change. That relevance, in a world that is constantly evolving, often comes with a price. And that price is not always visible, but it is always there. Quietly shaping decisions, quietly influencing outcomes, quietly redefining what it means to belong. Because ultimately, this moment is not just about one individual's departure. It is about what that departure reveals. About the balance between honoring the past and preparing for the future. About the difficult, often unspoken reality that institutions must evolve, even when that evolution feels deeply human in its cost. Because ultimately, this story is about more than one individual, it's about the institution itself. In the end, no dramatic announcement was needed. The silence said everything. A door closed, a roll erased, and a message delivered with unmistakable clarity. Within the monarchy, no position is beyond scrutiny. There were no lengthy statements, no carefully staged explanations to soften the impact. Just a brief confirmation, measured and restrained, released into the public space, and left to stand on its own. And in that restraint, there was something powerful. Because the monarchy has always understood the weight of silence. It is not emptiness, it is control. It is the deliberate choice to say only what is necessary and nothing more. And in moments like this, that silence becomes its own form of communication. It invites interpretation, but never confirmation. It allows speculation, but never validation. And perhaps most importantly, it protects the institution from becoming entangled in the very questions it quietly provokes. This is not accidental. It is strategy. A way of maintaining authority without surrendering to explanation. Because once explanations begin, they demand more. More detail. More justification. More vulnerability. And the monarchy, by its very nature, resists that exposure. Instead, what remains is a clear, if unspoken, message. Discipline matters. Accountability is not optional. And longevity, no matter how impressive, does not place anyone beyond the reach of consequence. It is a standard that reinforces itself not through words, but through action. Quiet, decisive action that reshapes the boundaries of expectation without ever needing to define them publicly. Yet beneath that control lies a delicate balancing act. The monarchy must remain both distant and relevant. It must uphold tradition while adapting to a world that demands transparency. And in navigating that tension, moments like this become unavoidable. They are the points where those competing demands intersect, where the need to preserve authority meets the pressure to evolve, and the outcome is rarely comfortable. For the public, this creates a sense of intrigue that never fully resolves. Questions linger, not because they cannot be answered, but because they are not meant to be. Curiosity grows in the spaces left intentionally unfilled. And while that curiosity may never find closure, it serves a purpose. It keeps the institution at the center of attention, even as it reveals almost nothing. A paradox that has defined the monarchy for generations. But beyond the speculation, beyond the unanswered questions, there is something more enduring at play. A reflection of how power operates within this world. Not loudly, not openly, but with a quiet certainty that shapes outcomes without ever needing to justify them. Duty remains the guiding force, even when it demands difficult decisions. Legacy remains the priority, even when it requires letting go of those who helped build it. And perhaps that is the most haunting part of all, that within an institution so deeply rooted in history, individual stories can be both essential and expendable at the same time, valued for their contribution, yet ultimately secondary to the continuity of the whole. It is a reality that defines the monarchy, even if it is rarely acknowledged outright. Because in the end, what remains is not the individual, but the system. Not the personal, but the institutional. A structure that endures precisely because it is willing to make choices that others might avoid. And in doing so, it reinforces the very principle it was built upon, that the crown stands above all, even those who serve it most closely. Because in the world of the royals, what isn't said often speaks the loudest of all. Thanks for watching. Please don't forget to like and subscribe, and we will see you in the next one.